This is the second cycle of the gaming mitigation program that Mass Cultural Council is running, and we are very happy to get this relief out to everyone. We are going to be covering a lot of information today, some of it new, some of it changes from last year. So feel free to ask questions and to to email after the session if you would like to continue to learn more. I will get started with the presentation.
Folks, if possible, we would like you to use the Q&A function, not the chat. That will allow us to keep all of our responses together, and we really appreciate that. Thanks.
So today you are hearing the voices of myself, Cheyenne Cohn-Postel. I am the program officer with the Cultural Investment Portfolio. I actually also just became the Diversity and Equity Initiatives Program Officer for Mass Cultural Council. So yay for new beginnings. And as you know, I manage this gaming mitigation program. My partner in crime for this program is Sarah Glidden. You've also heard her voice. She will be manning the Q&A when you have questions. She will either answer your question in the Q&A or she will source questions for me to answer live. So that will be Sarah's kind of discretion there. I will go over an agenda and things like that so you know what will be covered. Sarah is our program manager in the Cultural Investment Portfolio, and she has been here with gaming from day one. So we are both here to help you. So the goal of the gaming mitigation program is to mitigate a direct threat to the sustainability of nonprofit and municipal performing arts centers. All of that is to say that performing arts centers have a place in our Commonwealth. So this money will be given to performing arts centers to help them compete for touring artists. If you have questions, we already mentioned there's a Q&A, but we hope that you will be able to shoot your questions to us when they are on topic to make sure that we are keeping everything in the right place. So feel free, if you feel like you missed your time to answer questions, we'll ask at the end. But please let us get into it a little bit before you start asking your questions, because I might be able to answer it. And just to note that this presentation is a supplement to the published guidelines. So anything in this presentation is supposed to help you understand our guidelines, not take the place of our guidelines. So today we will talk about eligibility, our touring credentials, which is a new thing, the application itself, which is in a new system, a review process and timeline, and then we can go back for more questions. Eligibility. So the first piece of eligibility is that this program, Gaming Mitigation, funds Massachusetts performing arts centers. So we have defined performing arts centers as having a mission, a primary mission to promote access, excellent diversity, or education in the arts, humanities, or interpretive sciences. So arts, humanities, interpretive sciences are how we have defined a cultural organization. So we want our performing arts centers to be cultural organizations that commit 50% or more of their operating expenses to the performing arts. There's no requirement to own a venue. You just need to be cultural with the emphasis on performing arts. And there are several ways to have your business model count as a performing arts center. So that's where we'll go next. The first is fully cultural Massachusetts nonprofits can be performing arts centers. You have to be legally recognized in good standing with the Attorney General's office. You have to do all of your filing, and you just have to be a 501c3 in good standing. But this includes nonprofits that are managed by a separate nonprofit managing entity with a long-term contract, lease, or deed. If you have questions about that, feel free to put them in the chat. But that's the easiest way to be a performing arts center. You're already fully cultural, you're already in good standing, and you commit 50% or more of your budget to performing arts. The second, if you are not fully cultural, you can still be eligible for this program as a cultural affiliate. Cultural affiliates are semi-independent performing arts centers that operate under a nonprofit parent organization. So the parent organization may not be dedicated to the access and education in arts, sciences, and humanities, but the cultural affiliate, the program in question, should be dedicated to the arts, humanities, and interpretive sciences. So in addition to that cultural mission, the cultural affiliate needs to commit at least 50% of its expenses to the performing arts, as well as manage their own budget, have at least one full-time compensated staff dedicated to this program, and have its own advisory board. So cultural affiliates, we have several. If you are in the cultural investment portfolio, there are cultural affiliates in that program. A lot of times it pops up for universities. There'll be a department in the university that is, say, a gallery in a performing space. And if they manage their own budget, have a full-time staff member, an advisory board, and also commit themselves to the performing arts, that cultural affiliate will be eligible for this program. The next is Massachusetts municipalities can own a performing arts center, and that performing arts center can be managed by the municipality itself or by a separate managing entity. Eligible managing entities can be nonprofit or for-profit, as long as they have a long-term. For us means 5 years. You could be in the 5th year of that contract. You just have to have that in writing for us to confirm that you have management responsibilities with this performing arts center. Ineligible managing entities are or operate under the direction of resort style or slot parlor casinos. We can't grant to the casinos, so that is an obvious ineligibility there. The second main feature of eligibility is that the performing arts center must present touring shows or artists. And this is because it is in the statute that created this fund that award amounts must be spent on fees to touring shows or artists. So if you don't present touring shows or artists, you can't use the grant money as is required. So touring shows or artists, we have defined as independent entities being presented as a guest at the organization. This could be the show or the artist is the entire show and it all comes as a guest to your venue, or they can be a headliner within a self-produced production, as long as that headliner has name recognition that is used as a marketing tool. So that is Audra McDonald in your Porgy and Bess, and other stars who come on the stage, even if you are producing the piece. To move on to how you verify that the show or artist you're thinking of is eligible for this funding, we have created a set of 3 credentials based on feedback from our first round that people were using to verify their touring artists. We started with touring artist rosters and Polestar specifically, and now we have added to that a touring schedule as the second credential, or touring artist representation as the third. And we need each artist that you are claiming to have 2 of these 3 credentials. To expand on them, we have Polestar, Bands in Town, Songkick, Sinars. These are rosters that either were used in the first round of the program or were sourced to us through the feedback that we asked after the first round. And this is a list of 6. It is not exhaustive. You have the opportunity to continue to teach us the ways in which you find touring artists. So this list will hopefully get longer as the program continues, and we get a continuing idea of the reality of booking touring artists in Massachusetts. The second is a touring schedule. You should provide a link to the show or artist schedule that includes dates in at least 3 states in the last 3 years. This really has come up. New England is a very tight set of states, and we have the question of, if someone performs in Massachusetts and then goes right over the line and performs in New Hampshire, does that count as a tour? What if it happened 5 years ago and somebody's just getting back? So this is kind of the bar that we've set here to make sure that we're getting at touring artists are artists that make their living from performing around our nation. So it's at least 3 states, including Massachusetts. So Massachusetts and 2 others or 3 others in the last 3 years. That can be their Facebook events page. It can be their website. It can be whatever schedule you have to verify. The third is touring artist representation. Same thing with the rosters. This list has been sourced from our past applicants and from the feedback process. There are others. I think the main credential here is that it's established representation that we at Mass Cultural Council can find and point to when we are talking about professional touring artists. Before I move on to application, Sarah, is there anything that has popped up that you think we should talk through right now?
Sorry, have to unmute. The question is, what if they haven't toured in over a year due to COVID?
That is perfectly fine. As long as they toured in 2019 or even 2018, that is acceptable. We have made it 3 years because that seems doable and relevant. And based on how long COVID goes and these restrictions, we will continue to adjust that to be achievable.
Great. And then another question, as folks are identifying the agent or the roster, are we looking for a link to that as part of the application?
Yes, we are definitely looking for links. That is, I think, the easiest way to know that in addition to the others, but especially that artist representation is reputable. Everyone has a website. If you want people to book your artist, you should have a website. But we know that when it comes to schedules and things like that, there's not always a link to point to. So I will show you this once we get into the application itself, but links are preferred, but narratives are also welcome. We want you to be able to make the case in whatever way is possible for you.
Thank you. That's all of our questions for now.
Great. I am going to stop sharing for just a second so that I can get into the actual application to show you what we are working with there. So the application this year will be in our Smart Simple Grants Management System. If this is the first time that you're logging in, you'll probably want to start with forgot password. But in the hopes of staying on time and keeping on topic, I will just log in because it has remembered my password for me. This is probably not where we want to be because I don't want to ruin any secrets. So I'm going to go to my own profile. Here we go. And I am going to show you what you should be expecting when you log in. So you will see this screen when you log in and have a user profile for yourself. There is current opportunities where you can apply now for gaming mitigation to start the application, or if you have already started it, there will be something in progress here for you that you can go back to. But I will start here or apply now for gaming mitigation. There's an eligibility quiz to start. This first question here is about cultural affiliates. Do you have a parent organization? This is asking if you are a cultural organization. This one is asking if you are a cultural organization that focuses majority on the performing arts. If you actually said yes to parent organization, you would get some more questions to verify that you are an eligible cultural affiliate. So I'll just show those for a second. Do you manage your own budget? Do you have an advisory board? Do you have at least one full-time staff member, like we discussed? And then the last one, do you present touring shows or artists? So I will, sorry, the button is behind the closed captioning. Save draft there and move to the application. Okay. There we go. Great. So I am eligible. I will proceed to the application. This first page, applicant information, this will be pre-populated from your profile. So you'll put all this in when you create a user profile and then it will show up for you. The contract manager, that is explained here, who will be responsible for signing and returning. And this is where you will have questions about managing entity, if that is applicable to your organization. We will ask for your fiscal year start and end date and your total cash operating expenses. This information is asking about your most recently completed fiscal year. So this one, if your audit or your 990 was delayed for FY21 or FY20 for some reason, then you would use your actual completed and audited or fully submitted financial information here. Then we move on to getting information on what performing arts disciplines your organization does present. And this will give you an idea if something that you does is not technically performing arts. We know that there's a lot of organizations who are doing films or lectures, and those would not count as performing arts performances, and that will come up again later. We have the question of, does your organization only present performing arts, or are you multidisciplinary, where you might do the visual arts, the literary arts, and other types of classes as well? So give us an idea of which we should classify your organization. Next is the grant components. This section is asking for information from calendar year 2019, January 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2019. So whatever your most recently completed fiscal year that you're talking about in applicant information, this first tab, you will be turning around and every single applicant organization will be talking about calendar year 2019 for the grant components tab. And that is fully because we know that after calendar year 2019, touring artists and their activity has gotten dicey due to COVID, and we want this round to be competitive for everyone, and we want every organization, whether you applied in the past or if this is your first one, this is a level playing field. This is a different set of time period than we were talking about in the first round.
Cheyenne, I have a quick question for you here. As in the section where you are asking folks for their expenses of their most recently completed fiscal year, does that need to be audited? Because we have folks whose fiscal years have ended quite recently and their audit is not yet complete. This could make the difference between giving you fiscal 21 or even fiscal 20 numbers versus going back to fiscal 19 for an audited number.
So if you are required to get an audit, then you are required to report in applicant information your most recently fully completed audited year. If you are too small to be required to do an audit, then you are reporting on your most recently fully filed 990.
Okay, so that does mean for some folks, they're going to be going back to a fiscal 19 for their full audit. So a couple of questions on that. I think that answered it, but let me know if you need additional follow-up.
Yes, there is really what year you are reporting on in applicant information is fully dependent on what has been completed. We know that people have been delayed. It depends on what your fiscal year dates are, and we know that some organizations are June to July, some are calendar year. So that's going to change from applicant to applicant, but we are looking for final numbers, your most recent fully finalized numbers. To go back to grant components, there are two pieces that go into determining funding amounts. And this has not changed from the first round. There's total number of eligible performances or performances impacted. It's the first one. And the second one is total fees paid to performing artists. I will expand a little bit on performances impacted. I think fees paid to touring artists is a little obvious, but let me know if you do have questions there. So performances impacted. You find performances impact by taking every single performance that your organization, every single performing arts performance that your organization is responsible for. So maybe that is all of your presentations and all of your productions. Maybe it's all of your productions, even if they weren't in your venue because you don't have one, or it is every single performance that was in your venue, whether or not you presented it or you rented your space to another presenter. So every single performing arts performance, and then you divide that by the total number of performances that were won open to the public. So if you could go on a website and buy tickets for it, it was open to the public. If it's something like a student matinee or a performance for a corporate audience or just for board members, it's not open to the public and should not be counted as eligible. And the second is features an eligible touring show or artist. So you divide every single performing arts performance by the performances that were open to the public and featured a touring show or artist. So if the first number is 100, and then only 30 of those performances were eligible or impacted, then the formula would take into account that 30% of your performances are impacted, and the formula allocates more funds to applicants with a higher number of performances, or a higher percentage of performances impacted. To report this, we have the regular number fields, total number of all performances, total number of performances by eligible touring shows or artists, and we have total fees paid to eligible shows and artists, and the fees can include compensation as well as housing and travel costs, if those are applicable. What is new this year is that we have created a template for you to include that list of total performances that will, we hope, help put all of the information in one place. It will give you an idea if a performance is eligible. You can put all of your information in there, including the credentials for your touring artists. So I'm going to download the template so you can see it and open that up. I'm going to hope that my Zoom didn't just freeze. Sarah, can you still hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
And you
And
still
unmuting makes it possible for you to hear me.
okay. And you can still see Smart Simple on this?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Great. There is a whole thing happening with my computer right now because why not?
Always nice with an audience. I don't
Yeah.
know that if that makes this a performing arts event or not, though.
It feels like it. And it feels like the reviews will be terrible. So my computer has totally frozen, so I cannot change screens. But I will talk you through the document, and then when my computer stops freaking out, hopefully I will be able to show you. It is an Excel document where you will include the date and time of the performance, the name of the performance or production. There will be a separate column for name of touring show or artist in case those things are different. Sometimes it is Ben Platt and it's featuring Ben Platt. Sometimes it is Corey Ambas featuring Audra McDonald. So you can use whatever column is more descriptive of what is eligible. There's a column with drop downs to identify which credential you will be linking to, either artist roster, touring schedule, or artist representation, and then the column for the link or explanation itself, and you'll have that twice for credential number 1 and credential number 2. There will be a column where you can indicate whether or not the performance is open to the public. There is a column to indicate whether or not this performance was a rental of your space, because that is relevant in your fees paid to touring shows or artists. If the touring show or artist is actually being presented by a renter and you are not paying the fees directly to the artist, you can count that as an eligible performance but you cannot count the fees paid to the artist because your organization is not the one making that payment. And then there is a column that when you type into it, you won't see anything because we're trying to keep fees paid to performing artists as proprietary as it should be. We don't want to know how much you're paying to individual artists. We are not asking you to disclose that. But some people will have a lot of information that they may not be tracking this way. So we have created a column in the spreadsheet where you can put in the fees paid to every eligible artist that you are listing in your list, and it will do the math for you. And I won't be able to see that information. And we will be locking all of these submissions once they're made, so nobody has access to each of the individual cells. But fees paid to touring artists is a very, very important component to your grant amount, and we just want to make sure that everybody has the chance to get that number as correct as possible. You're still totally down. Sarah, do we have a questions update?
A question about how rental, or if rental of your space by outside organizations is included in any of our calculations for how much grant they will receive.
No, because this program funds presenters without venues as well as presenters with venues, we have allowed applicants to count the performances of renters as a part of their business model and will be reflected in the total performances component. But to level the playing field between business models, the amount of rent or any of that is not calculated here.
And then a question about an organization that presents both local non-touring artists and touring artists, and whether the fees paid to the non-touring local artists count in the calculation.
Great question. They do not. So that is something that a little bit of math will be necessary, especially for productions that include an independent entity that is an eligible touring artist. You can count all of the fees paid to them, but not the rest of the ensemble. And in the same way, if for some reason you are presenting this show or artist both in and outside of Massachusetts, then we would not count the performances outside of Massachusetts as eligible performances. We're not going to ask you to try to extract the fees for those performances outside of Massachusetts, but those dates would not count as eligible performances.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. I don't know if I can even, is the slide changed?
It has not. Now, if you need me to, you could stop sharing your screen and I could start sharing mine. I have the PowerPoint available.
I would love to stop sharing my screen if it gave me that option too.
Okay. Not even that.
No, it's
actually I have the power. I can stop your screen sharing.
yes, please do, Sarah. Help me.
I'm going to do that, and you could take a look at the Q&As while I'm doing this. Okay.
Sarah, take the wheel.
I'm doing it.
Okay.
And I'm guessing you can now see my screen. Folks, if somebody could just type into the Q&A if you are seeing my screen.
I see it, Sarah.
That's lovely. And I know it's not in the beautiful presenter view. You know, the show must go on, so we find the way.
Yes, I appreciate everyone's graciousness while we do this.
Am I on the screen you would like me to be on the slide you'd like me to be on?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm now seeing some of the questions in the chat. And yes, there is a reason to include rentals. One is because your total performances should be true to reality. A rental in your space is still a performance from which you benefit financially. And also, if that rental includes a eligible touring artist, that bumps up your impacted performance percentage and may make sure the formula allocates more money to you. So rentals are important. Okay, so timeline and process. Sarah, let's move to the next one. Okay, so this is a staff reviewed program. There is not a panel review because this one is less about the merits of your project and really just more about the factual reality of your business. So we will be reviewing applications for eligibility first to make sure that you are an eligible cultural affiliate, that you have eligible performing arts expenses and that kind of thing. And ineligible applicants are notified as soon as we know that you're ineligible. So there will not be a long wait if you to find out you are ineligible. Eligible applications then go to a spot checking process to make sure that the links provided make work, that the information provided that may have not been included on the suggested rosters or the artist's representation are within the intent for those credentials. And so that will be spot checked, and there will be time for organizations to change or update anything that can and needs to be changed or updated. And then we move everyone into the applicant pool. I think you can go to the next slide. Okay. Everybody's still in the applicant pool after corrections have been made, after we've notified anybody who's ineligible. This really goes to the not only gaming mitigation staff, but our senior staff at Mass Cultural Council to set the maximum and minimum grant amounts based on the amount of funding we have available, the amount of applications. If there is a minimum grant amount that either is set low enough to include every single applicant or is set high enough that some organizations are ineligible because they don't meet that amount. Those are all conversations and decisions that are made once we know who is in the applicant pool. We were very, very fortunate in the first round of this program to be able to fund every single eligible applicant, and our awards ranged from $1,000 to $250,000. I don't know what that's going to look like this cycle, but I think we had a really, really successful first round of funding, and that's because we had a really good applicant pool and thankfully a $3.34 million from the casinos. We know that in the time since then, the casinos have been doing less brisk business because of COVID. So that will factor in this year. Are there any questions related to this so far, Sarah?
I can't see the questions now. So I'm sorry. I have to
no, you can't see the Okay, it doesn't look like there's anything about this right now. We will try to go back to the template for sure, now that Sarah is sharing. Sarah, if you want to stop sharing for a second,
Sure.
I can tell you where the template lives. It's in the gaming mitigation folder, if you want to pull that up in the O drive.
Okay.
And I will just answer.
We really are showing everyone how it works behind the curtain, aren't we?
Yes. Yes, it is it's beautiful to be able to improvise in this way. There is a question about, do we know the total amount of funds available for this round? Our governing council has approved this program to grant up to $3 million if that amount of funds are available in the account at the time that we do contracts, which should be in early February this year. So I'm hoping that we will be able to award up to $3 million. Let's see.
In the guidelines and applications folder?
Yes. Yes. There was a question, yes, because this is now calendar year 2019. I realize that will span a couple fiscal years for organizations. So you will only be able to count the performances of a production that happen in calendar year 2019. So if that is maybe one show at the one show at the end of a run for some reason, then you would only be able to count that one show. The fees paid to the artists, again, we are not asking you to slice and dice those. So you would be able to count the entire fees for the artist for that run, but in your total number of eligible performances, you can only count the performances that happen within the time frame.
So Cheyenne, tell me if this is the right form.
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay.
Very exciting. Thank you so much. So this is the template. Event, date, time, name. Is it open to the public? That'll be a drop down. Yep. Thank you, Sarah, for putting stuff in. The event name is actually a category that you don't have to use if column F is the more descriptive. But see, these are drop downs to make it easy, open to the public, yes or no. The goal is to make sure that you do not include fees for anything that you had to put no in. Yep, Sarah Glidden again, for Sarah Glidden on stage. This is the drop down with the 3 answers. So here she would provide a link to a roster. And then in column I, you would do the same thing. You would choose a different option from the drop down. Yep, and then you include a link to the touring schedule. Sarah, it's like you've done this before.
I've been paying attention.
The column K is really just another indicator for you to keep things straight. You don't need to put anything in there unless it's no, because if it is no, you can't count those fees paid to the artist. Column L is the column. Sarah, can you demonstrate typing a number in there? Yep. Ooh.
Decided I'm really worth a lot.
Yes,
so.
You are worth, wow, a lot. So you see,
I can dream.
So in the column, in the cell itself, it disappears. When I view these Excels, the formula bar will be gone, and the Excels will be protected. So yes, as you put numbers in, it changes in that green column. If this is helpful to you to keep these numbers straight, because you don't have them anywhere else, then please feel free to use it. It is not required because, again, we know that these fees are proprietary, so you don't have to share them. Sarah, I'm actually going to kick this question to you because you have so much more experience with our general requirements MS Cultural Council. The question is, must a facility be handicap accessible to receive grants?
It's an excellent question. We do expect that every grantee organization is in compliance with federal laws around access and disability. This would be the Americans with Disabilities Act. I'm not going to come up with the right number. It's Section 504 plans. We know that in historical facilities, this is not always possible on a 100% basis, but we do expect that you are making every effort to be in compliance with the federal law. I hope that helps.
Great. And the other question, the other side of that question was, can a virtual performance kind of help a otherwise not physically accessible performance count as accessible? And I don't know if that will actually come into play because, again, we're talking about the calendar year 2019, and I don't know how many of us were that far ahead that we were creating virtual performances to go along with our in-person performances. But I think it does still stand that all of our grantees must be in accordance with ADA laws. Somebody has their hand up. Katie, did you have a question you wanted to ask? You can unmute yourself now if you'd like to ask out loud. I guess no. There is a question about will the amount that casinos are generating impact the amount of funding? At this point, no. The council has approved the program to grant up to $3 million. So that means that if the account has more than $3 million, that will continue to either wait for the next round of gaming mitigation or be used for one of the other authorized uses from our gaming mitigation fund. Oh yes, there's a question about festivals, and I'm glad that you bring that up. Festivals are eligible to receive funding, but we know that festivals are a different thing. It's several different performances on one day. You should count each set as its own performance. So it wouldn't be in your list of events, it wouldn't just be festival one day. It would be, there were these 12 performances in this one day for our festival. And yes, each performer from the festival has to have 2 of the 3 credentials. And again, that is still something that we're working on and learning, so you can make that case. However, it needs to be made. Maybe there's a different credential that you have found working with artists to book you for your festival. Either way, you will have to provide 2 data points for those artists. I'm just reading another question. So, okay, so this question is, we had a couple of shows that were kind of showcases and featured a collection of various touring artists, say 4 in one per show, like a variety show, I would imagine. Would it be a different line for each? No, I think If it's one performance where you buy, and this is antithetical to festivals, so feel free to continue to ask questions. If they are performing together and it is one performance that you buy tickets for, then you would count that as one eligible performance, but you would count the fees paid to all 4 performers. If that answers your question.
And then we have a question about fundraising events with performers, and I'm assuming by performers, the questioner means eligible touring artist performers.
Yes, fundraisers are not eligible open to the public performances. Yes, local touring artists are eligible if they tour. So if they're based in Massachusetts, but you have their agent's information and you have a link to a tour of them being in New Hampshire and Rhode Island along with Massachusetts in the last 3 years, yes, it's fine if they're locally based. Yo-Yo Ma around here blessing us all with his presence. He's still a headliner with name recognition. He's still a touring artist. Yes, and for the follow-up, yes, I think you can pick one to provide in a case where you have one show that features several eligible artists. Yes, you can pick one and provide credentials for that one, even though you are including the fees for all of them, because it would count as one performance. Ruth, this is a very interesting question. I'm gonna read this out loud. I'm assuming concerts for youth that involve schools are not eligible, but that family concerts with a conductor who has name recognition where anyone can purchase a ticket is. You have the idea of eligible performances correct. Performances that are for schools, and if I'm just a person looking to go to a show and I can't buy a ticket, that's not an eligible performance. The interesting layer here is the conductor, and that's not something that I have touched on. Thank you so much for bringing it up. We are talking about touring artists that are on stage performing. So I think conductors, Sarah, what's your read here on a conductor? Because a conductor is different than a choreographer. The choreographer does not come up on stage. They might be famous and be selling tickets, but they're not shown on stage. But conductors are visible to the audience. Do you mind having a conversation with me about that?
I'd love to double check it, but my memory from last cycle was that the conductor who is on stage is a performing artist, even though they are not making any sound.
That was my read as well. As long as the person is required to be at every performance in front of the audience, then yes, they are a eligible touring artist. And if the general public can buy a ticket to a performance featuring them, you can count that performance. Thank you, Ruth, for bringing that up. Yes, I will elaborate on the formula. So this program, we know how much money we have to grant. We set the guidelines of who and what is eligible, but we let a formula decide our funding amounts. So the 2 pieces of information that feed into the formula are what % of your presented performances are impacted by competition with casinos. And the other point is, what dollar amount do you pay to touring shows or art and artists? So the formula takes those pieces of information from every applicant and gives us an idea with the different minimums and maximum numbers. It tells us how much money would be allocated to every eligible applicant. So it would compare people who have 100% impacted performances, but only spend $1,000 in touring artist fees, with an organization that has 20% impacted performances, but spends $20,000 on fees. So the formula kind of gives us an equitable idea of how the money should be allocated based on the parameters that we set. Yes, there will still be narrative questions. It will be in the impact over time section of the application. And just like in the past, there will be similar questions. So we've cut a few of them just based on the advocacy that we've had to do since the first cycle. So there's a couple questions that you might remember that don't show up again. But again, the impact over time section does not affect your eligibility, nor does it affect the funding requirements. So we will ask questions about how you compete with casinos, the financial impact. We will ask questions about revenue generated by all performances and by touring shows and artists. But that information is for us to maintain the health and the robust nature of the program, and not to make decisions about individual grants. Yes, international artists are eligible, even if they have only performed, if they're only state-signed performances in Massachusetts, they are inherently touring because they're international. So yes, that is, and then they are eligible. Yes. Thank you, Karen. Yes, you count all the fees. If it's one show, if it's the original Kings of Comedy and you have 4 Kings of Comedy out there, you count the fees to all 4 Kings of Comedy, but you choose Steve Harvey to be your representative, and you provide credentials for Steve and let him kind of speak for the whole group. Jennifer, do you want to unmute and say your comment out loud? Is that something you want to do? Let me see your question.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My question was, I noticed that somebody else asked this earlier and I missed your response. So if in this previous grant that we were funded, some of the funding covered performances in 2019, am I to not list them in this list or to include them as a full, complete list?
Great question. Yes.
And I apologize for not hearing what you said.
No, no problem. You should definitely include performances, even if they happen to be performances that you claimed in the first round of funding. There's no exclusivity between something that may have been reported for cycle 1 now in cycle 2. There is something to keep in mind. Last year, not last year, but for cycle 1, we actually did not require a final report, and that was lovely, and we were very happy to be able to do that because of the circumstances. But if you have not spent your entire grant amount from cycle 1, we cannot grant you again for cycle 2. So that is something to keep in mind. Pay your touring artists. You could have used your grant funds retroactively or moving forward from cycle 1. So this is a reminder to spend all of that money before you apply again. Thank you so much. Anybody else? Another question?
Would you like me to shift back to the PowerPoint?
Yes, that would be great. And we can talk about timeline.
Okay. I think I have to.
Documenting the money spent from FY20 will probably not be something that you have to worry about until March. Not March. Yes, March, when we get to the final report for round 2. So not something to worry about now. The documentation, we're not asking for that documentation for the application. It's just something to keep in mind. You don't want to be awarded a grant that needs to be reverted in any way. So I'm just putting that as a very, very early heads up. To clarify, if we're awarded funds that can support future engagements with touring artists, yes. What's great about these gaming mitigation funds is because they have to be spent so specifically, we are allowing for funds to be either used retroactively to the last fiscal year. So you can use funds to pay for artists that you presented in FY20, or you can use the funds for performances that are coming up in your FY21 fiscal year, or to move forward into the beginning of your FY22 fiscal year. So there's 1 year looking back or 1 year looking forward when you're thinking about the use of these grant funds. And simply, look, you're already on that slide. And because there is a forward-facing use of these funds, that has come up with virtual performances. You can use these grant funds for artist fees for virtual performances. Housing costs and travel costs are, of course, for only in-person performances, because there's no housing or travel for virtual performances. But if you know you will be bringing someone in for virtual performances after you awarded this grant, you can use it for that. Let's go to the timeline slide. So the applications will be due at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on November 5th, 2021. We will announce our grantees in January, and contracts will be going out through the new grants management system in early February. We're still rolling out the grants management system, but I believe that you will be able to go into it and download your grant contract, sign it with a wet signature, and mail it back to us. So that will be in early February. And then there it is, November of 2022, there will be the final report that will have more of that financial reporting on how you use the grant funds. Let me go back to, okay, let's, last call for questions. Is there anything that has come up, anything burning that people would like to ask? Or anything you want to just go over again, because it would be helpful. Great. I really appreciate everyone being here. You can reach out to me through email. It's probably the easiest because we are still working remote, for questions that are specific to your organization. thank you so much, Dee Dee. Wonderful to see you without actually seeing you. So yes, feel free to reach out. I would love to have conversations about specific eligibility. I want to make sure as many organizations receive this money as possible. Robert, the competition with casinos has actually been something that we have talked about a lot. Our job here at Mass Cultural Council is to make sure that performing arts organizations have the resources they need to compete with casinos, not for us to determine what specifically competes with casinos. So we have not put discipline other than performing arts, because casinos have stages and they book touring artists. But we're not saying that it's rock and roll over chamber music, or if a performance has to be at a certain time to have to be in direct competition. It's more of the market for touring artists. If we want artists to be coming and performing in Massachusetts and helping the economy in that way, we want performing arts centers to be competitive in that field. So I hope that answers your question, Robert. And thank you so much, everyone.